You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Okay, in this presentation, we're going to take a look at Latin America as it modernizes in the 20th century and kind of take a look at some of the foundations for the resistance that's going to occur later on as what is known as the Pink Tide. So as Latin America moved towards the modern state, we'll take a look at the late 19th and 20th centuries. Numerous changes are going to occur, but however, the changes are not as significant as the major institutions of the past continue undisturbed, as you will see from the previous presentation. The landed aristocracy is still going to maintain control. There will still be attitudes towards labor that will be negative, and the political apparatus will not essentially change to favor the majority. The center of political, social, and economic life changes, though, from the hacienda or the plantation to the city. Political stability does replace chaos, with the military become a very powerful force in Latin America. The rural aristocracy is still in control as the states will get bigger in the 20th century, but the rural aristocracy has to make room for a rising industrial and merchant class. The wealthiest are still white, the wealthiest are still politically powerful. And dependency is going to be accelerated rather than diminished because foreign loans are going to increase, investments and inventions and technology and technicians and ideology is going to be imported. Social inequality, racism, privilege, dependency, and paternalistic rule is going to chart a course in Latin America towards conflict. But there are some developments in the 20th century that are important to understand. The city becomes the center of government and industry. There's a correlation between your class status and your participation in the modernization process. The educational and career opportunities are located in the city, which can inspire upward mobility. Education is a privilege for the wealthy. There's going to be a huge percentage of illiteracy in Latin America. There's going to be the perpetuation of things European, the perpetuation of things American, not Latin American. So when we take a look at the elites can be defined as those groups which hold the reins of power. They control the nation's political and economic destiny. They manipulate the nation's institutions to serve their own interests. They traditionally have turned to Europe and the US for models of economic and social development and cultural development. They're composed primarily of Latin Americans of white European heritage. Now, recent changes have affected the constituency of the elite class. There's the inclusion of the military in the elite class, there's the exclusion of the church, and this reflects the changing role of each as a key institution in Latin America today. But there's the rise of the middle sector, and the middle sector began to take form in the latter half of the 19th century when national income and national technology was on the rise. It consists largely of government bureaucrats, shop owners, business clerical workers, and those in the liberal professions, doctors, lawyers, teachers. They have an above average education, they have steady employment, they're internationally oriented, and there's a large percentage of foreign immigrants. They congregate in the cities, and their political influence far outreaches their actual numbers. Their hope for social mobility rests primarily on the nation's acceptance and implementation of the principles of modernization. They are a consumer society whose preference is for their own economic improvement. They want improved, expanded education, they want rapid industrialization and modernization, and they will use the government to foment change. Initially, they will seek political reform and at times social and economic reforms, but in the latter part of the 20th century, the middle class is going to align itself with the most conservative elements. They will support military regimes and elite-oriented governments. They will fear widespread change. They will fear mass political movements, and they will fear the emergence of what is known as a folk culture in the countryside. And like the elites, the middle class will emulate foreign models. They will seek stability, and they will look upon foreign investments as a positive influence. Then there is the rise of the urban and rural proletariat, the rural working classes. They remain oppressed by the internal structures of the economy. They have been cut off from the decision-making process. They have little input into the economy and the national institutions which direct their lives. The rural and urban sectors, the workers, they are crucial participants in an economy which requires their labor, yet they remain unserved by the economy and the institutions which they help maintain. So they are marginalized from the power base. They realize that the institutions do not serve them, but they see very little that they can do to alter them outside of violent confrontation. They organize unions to protect their interests. They always seek change, and they're always challenging the wealthy. They cooperate with discontented middle groups to get modest changes. However, once the middle sectors obtain what they want, the middle sectors usually abandon the working class and they align with the elite, which brings us to the military and its role. The military in Latin America is a very expensive institution where large percentages of the national budgets are allocated. They make economic decisions for the countries, which determines the extent of growth and development in their countries. But the military never acts alone. They're associated with the maintenance of the status quo. They are the armed agent of the middle and upper classes, and they make no effort to alter the land structures, which is the landed oligarchy, which is the ones that are in control. They provide favors to foreign investors. They torture political prisoners, and they eliminate political opposition. So they always facilitate, they always try to stop, or the military always fails to generate mass support. So let's talk about reform. Reform means a gradual change or modification of established economic, political, or social structures. Now, most middle groups and working classes desire reform. They want, what is reform all about? Expanded education, a restriction of foreign control. They want to institute welfare and labor programs. So reforms basically favor the urban elements, but they never extend to the countryside. Landowners and rural socioeconomic structures are never directly challenged in the 20th century. This is primarily because of the middle sector's fear of landowners' power, their preoccupation with the city, intermarriage with landowning families or business connections are constantly happening, and there's always a desire by the middle classes to acquire land for themselves. Okay, let's talk about nationalism. And nationalism is a group consciousness that attributes great value to the nation state to which loyalty is pledged. Members of a nation pledge unity, independence, sovereignty to their country, and most everybody desires modernization and economic independence. So in the early 20th century, a lot of nations went through what is known as a cultural nationalism. They sought their indigenous roots of national culture to make an attachment to the land, and they were influenced by the interior, the hinterlands, and the frontier. Then when the Great Depression occurred that hit worldwide, an economic nationalism was created. The Depression creates crisis in countries, and the governments have to step in to guide the nation's economy. So this was where there was a promotion in Latin America of industrialization to diversify the economy and the control of their own resources, especially oil, tin, and copper. And after World War II to the present, Latin America has gone through models of development. As greater numbers are exposed to the benefits of modern society, change has to take place. The old institutions of the past must be replaced by new ones. So changes occur in economic nationalism, where the political left increases their influence in government, and instead criticism of foreign policies become important foreign economic institutions. The U.S. At many times in Latin America has become the hated enemy, and naturally because the United States through Wall Street controls the economies through investment, and Wall Street tends to preserve the status quo in Latin America. So there's many different models of change. Economic development is going to occur after World War II in full swing. Governments are going to attempt to control their natural resources. There's going to be limitations that are going to be imposed on foreign capital. There's going to be increased industrialization, and there's going to be trade with all nations. However, with regards to modernization and nationalism, that seldom meant development. The elite and the middle sectors benefited at the expense of the masses. Landowners did not relinquish their estates. Products were still geared towards the export economies. Debt peonage is still common. Even where land was redistributed, the people in the countryside were deprived of necessary services, health, education, housing, and equipment and credit. Also, most of the land was marginal that was distributed. Lands that had never been occupied were a great distance from the markets, and soil was poor, no water was available. And so in Latin America, right after World War II, we're going to see a rural to urban migration. The cities supposedly offered a better life for peasants, for the countryside. But industrialization was concentrated in the cities. The Depression and World War II caused this to grow very fast. However, foreign investment controlled the nature of the industry, a new type of dependency in which Latin America relied on foreign investment, technology, technicians, and markets. So it funneled the wealth to those in control. The elites and the aspiring middle sectors created ties between the landowner and the industrialist to expedite the export economy. So with industrialization came the rise of this working class, of the working classes. They formed coalitions to check elite power. Their standard of living rose, but it was very limited. They were harnessed politically to keep them in control, and they were brutally suppressed when they agitated for change, especially striking for better wages. But urbanization, the higher in society, the more steadier employment, the better access to healthcare, education, etc. in this experience. But the countryside, people who were coming from the countryside into the cities were forced to live in slums. There was no employment for them. There was no education provided. There was poor sanitation and health care. So the reforms only went to the middle class. And this is why in Latin America you can see tremendous poverty everywhere. Modernization called for the building of freeways, these magnificent buildings, these parks, these stadiums, these tunnels, but no public services for the poor. So, and many times in Latin America, you can see these fancy buildings, these fancy modernized cities, but in the midst of tremendous poverty. Democracy, this is a call for free elections and the peaceful transition of public office. The political process accommodated itself nicely to the interests of the middle class without harming the elites. The role of women increases, but they are still doubly exploited, first as women and second as workers. And the role of the church still favors the status quo, but there has been a steady change towards favoring the poor. They do try to help the poor organize, and it begins in the 1960s with what is known as the theology of liberation. So there's weaknesses with regards to democracy in Latin America. There's tremendous unemployment, underemployment, there's hunger, illiteracy. The system favors the elite and middle classes, not the majority. There's a democratic ideology is imported and used for the benefit of the few. There's no social services that are available to the poor. The national resources are spent on luxuries, arms, highways, televisions, cars, consumer items, but not for the benefit of the people. And so all of this is preparing you for the text book and the introduction to 21st century socialism.
You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.